Ladies and gentlemen, is there a renewed interest in God, Christianity, and Jesus in the culture? Because it appears there might be. In fact, we're going to have a couple of guests on today that are on the front lines of this in the culture. They go to college campuses, or is it Campi? They go to college campuses and do open air preaching and take questions. We had this father-son team on before. We want to have them on again. Cliff and Stuart Konecny do great work on the college campus. They have several campuses. They're visiting as we speak. We're going to tell you about them as we go, but we're going to ask them some questions about what they're seeing on college campuses. What are some of the objections they're getting? How do they respond? You don't want to miss this program. So here they are, the father-son team, Cliff and Stuart Konecny. Welcome to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Gentlemen, how are you?
Great, Frank. How you
Thank
doing,
you, Frank,
brother?
for having us on.
We here are doing wonderful, and I'm just so excited because it seems like over the past year, Cliff and Stuart, your ministry has just exploded, and you've been on some what we might say would be secular podcasts. You went on with Logan Paul. You've been on with Alex O'Connor. You debated, Cliff, I know you debated Matt Dillahunty not long ago. You've been on the George Janko show, which is a Christian show, but man, that gets a lot of views. You were part of the Christian Avenger show. We'll tell you about that as we go. Why do you think, let's start with you, Cliff. Why do you think there appears to be kind of a renewed interest in God and Christianity, even among secular? I mean, Joe Rogan just had Wes Huff on. What's going on?
I think there's an emotional fragility in our culture today. People are insecure, anxious. My father sat with his gun in the Swiss Alps as Hitler's Panzer divisions approached Switzerland. So that's what he had to deal with emotionally. Today, when a couple of election cycles ago, Donald Trump won, university students had to go to crying rooms to have counseling. That is a big shift when it comes to emotional strength or lack thereof, emotional fragility today. And I think people, driven often by their emotions, are looking for peace, for security, for a real joy that is not based on the circumstances of life. And I think that Jesus Christ provides that in an amazing way.
And Stuart, you started doing this with your dad how long ago? I mean, I know you're kind of a co-pastor with him at a church there in Connecticut, but you started going to college campuses with your dad how recently?
2015 is when we started together, University of Texas. But
all right,
I've been going with him since age 3 to places like Berkeley, where I still struggle with my PTSD from it, Frank.
Yeah, so we call it UCal Berkeley, but you guys have done open air preaching there. And just some of our listeners and viewers may not know exactly how you do this. Give us an idea of what a typical event looks like.
We stand up and speak for about 4 to 5 minutes on some topic from a biblical perspective. And then I say, that's all I had to say. I thought we'd open it up for question, answer, agreement, disagreement, wherever you guys are coming from. And the questions start coming, and we go for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours.
And Cliff, you started doing this in the 80s, if I remember correctly. You graduated seminary in 1979. So you've got, 40 plus years doing this. What changes have you seen over 40 plus years in the questions that are asked? Is there a change, or is it the same kind of stuff?
There's not a huge change. Moral relativism in general has become more hardened, more pervasive. But as I was saying earlier, the real change, I think, has been in the emotional fragility of people. I think divorce, the breakdown of the family, insecurity, anxiety, depression, the emotions are more fragile, and therefore I've had to soften up a bit compared to the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. So that's been the main change that I've seen.
When you say soften up, what do you mean by that?
I can't be quite as intense as I used to be. I used to enjoy going at it with people. Now I've got to really think about people's emotional fragility. I don't want to push people away by being too intense or too direct. So I think that has softened me up a bit.
Now, these programs you've been on recently, how did you come on their radar? Do you know, Stuart? Like, how did Logan Paul say, I want to have the Konecnys on, or Alex O'Connor? How did this happen?
Honestly, I have really no idea. I think they saw an opportunity to really put us on the hot seat, especially Logan. And that thing went pretty viral. But it's so fascinating with Logan. I've talked to him a decent amount offset, just texting a little bit here and there. He recently had a kid. I have a few kids. And he's very different off screen. He's very different from his WWE stuff. He's very different. He's always labeled this type of kind of the evil empire, the head of it all. And so it's fascinating. He kind of took that approach a little bit on the podcast we were with him, especially with you. But then Offset, and he even says this. I'm not outing him in any kind of way. He even says he'll easily, gladly take the role of the villain if there's money involved.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, sex, money, and power. Those are the three big things that many of us are after, right? So at least he's honest. But I think I didn't see the entire interview you had with him, but it seemed like he got a little uncomfortable with some of the arguments you were bringing forth, in the sense that he's thinking, wow, this is probably true, and that's going to have implications on me if I accept this. What's going to happen? I did see some of your Alex O'Connor interview. For those of you that don't know, Alex O'Connor is a brilliant young atheist / agnostic from Britain. He and I had a dialogue on Justin Brierley back in 2017. You can see on his YouTube channel. But Alex really, I think, tried to talk to you about the issues that bother you about Christianity. Cliff, what were the ones that he wanted to know about, and kind of give us a synopsis of an answer? Just pick any one of them.
Well, Alex is very upset with God commanding the Israelites to wipe out not just men, women, and children, but animals.
Mm-hmm.
So he really was going at the issue of how can God be so corrupt and cruel as to demand that innocent animals be slaughtered. So that was one of the main issues that he really hammered away on. Secondly, he hammered away on the contradictions in the New Testament. And although he brought up difficult textual questions, none of them were really contradictions. And I tried to show him that to the best of my ability. And then thirdly, when I asked him, what are you living for and why are you living for whatever it is you're living for, he refused to answer that, really. And he said, basically, this is not part of this debate. So I got a little direct with him at that point, and I'm not sure how well that was received, but I find it interesting that if someone's going to say there's not enough evidence for God, I have no problem with that. But then they better give me the option to God that is supported by more evidence. Otherwise, I'm going to accuse them of being intellectually dishonest. And that's what he took issue with.
See, I like that approach, Cliff. I think that's very wise. And I've tried to do that with some of the people I've spoken with. I won't debate, does God exist anymore? Because that puts the onus just on me. That I have all the burden of proof and the other guy has nothing. So every debate after the first one I had with Hitchens, the second one I had with Hitchens was, what better explains reality, atheism or theism? So we both have the burden of proof. And I don't know about you guys, but I find it a great oversight in our general discourse that people think Christians are the only ones that have the burden of proof to explain their worldview.
Exactly.
And so I think it's wise what you're doing I mean, my mentor, Dr. Norman Geisler, used to say this: it's easy to smell a rotten egg. It's hard to lay a better one.
Very good.
Right? Like, I can see, why Christianity's false. Oh, it's false. Okay. Well, what do you think's true? I don't know.
Yep.
Wait.
Exactly right.
So true. So true.
So there are so many things that need to be explained about reality that Christianity does explain that, of course, atheism does not. Now, what was the purpose or the impetus behind the Matt Dillahunty debate? Did that happen within the past year? Because I think it's maybe 6 months old on YouTube. How did that come about? And what was the topic there?
So you first debated Matt at Texas State 11 years ago in person.
Yep.
And then we've debated him. I debated him one-on-one, I want to say 5 years ago. Then we debated him 2-on-2 twice. And then you debated him once where I don't know if you saw this viral, our most
I,
viral clip probably on TikTok is Cliff saying what after Matt says something along the lines of crazy interpretation of the book of Revelation. I mean, insane. Matt's usually fairly fair when it comes to interpreting scripture, but this one on Revelation, so it's hilarious. He pulled this what? Well, I don't know. Again, that's another one. A couple guys reached out from a few different debate channels saying, "Do you want to debate him?" My very first one-on-one with him, I may have reached out, but it's typically been a couple different channels that have reached out. But the main one we've debated him on, again, Frank, to your point, it's unfair usually to the Christian, which is the God of the Old Testament and slavery, and him just being a moral monster kind of thing.
Yeah, of course they have no way of justifying morality if atheism's true. So
Right.
They're stealing from God to argue against him when they do that. But look, it is a fair question. I mean, it is. If God does exist, what about the Canaanites? What about slavery? Give us a little insight on the Canaanites. Why don't you start, Stuart, and then Cliff, you can, what would you say about that? Is God a moral monster for saying that these people needs to be judged?
Well, I would just take the animals for a second. So it's the men, women, children, and animals, because the animals, back to Alex O'Connor and many students recently, oddly enough, they have a bigger issue with the wiping out of the animals than the women and children and the men.
Oh, well, yeah. Hey, in our country, you can abort children. You can't abort puppies.
Right.
You can't do that.
That's interesting. It's a good point. So for me, it's, look, animals back then were not your pets. It was not your pet kitty cat. Animals were all about money. And so God did not want the Israelites to go in there and plunder and make a boatload of money off of the animals. And so they were called to wipe out the animals. And this was a level of justice. And obviously that same sword would turn on the Israelites for their own type of judgment. And so I just noticed that atheists, humanists, naturalists, secularists, whatever you want to call any denomination of atheism, they all want to go back to, well, the God that you're talking about should be the God of the 21st century and should be the God that we want in terms of what are our ethical standards. And if that God is living by our ethical standards, then fine. But no, if he's jiving with that culture, then that's not okay.
Cliff, anything to add?
I think the first question that I have to ask that person is, are you willing to allow God to judge? There's an incredible bias in our culture and our world against God judging. If God doesn't judge, I don't matter to him. If God doesn't judge the person who shoots me, steals my money, slanders me, then let's be real honest. I do not matter to God. No different from if someone breaks in this house right now and starts molesting my wife, the police come and they say, "What are you doing?" to Cliff's wife. And the guy says, "Oh, well, I don't know. I'm just messing around." And the police says, "Oh, let's go to Starbucks." Then let's be real honest. My wife does not matter to the police. So judgment, the judgment that God exercises is not the antithesis of love. It's part of love. Because God loves us, because we matter to him, he must judge. Otherwise, he doesn't love us. Otherwise, he's not just. So that's the first issue that I seek to clarify.
The second would be, okay, they could see judging the adults, but what about the children? What do you say about that?
I say that in our culture of individualism, we hate the idea that children have to pay the penalty for parents' corruption. But if you think clearly about it, you begin to realize that no great building, no great university was put together last summer. It was put together over a long period of time by people who sacrificed. And we benefit from that now as students, as participants in a museum. Well, in the same way that our decisions have positive impacts on the generations that follow us, so our bad decisions have incredible impact on the generations that go down before us. So this whole idea that, well, what I do is just between God and me or between another person and me is really naive. No, there are repercussions that stretch down through the generations that impact our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. And I'm sorry, that's just the result of living in a world where there is such a thing called cause and effect. And there are effects that are caused by us that stretch down through the years.
How much, Stuart, do you think having an eternal perspective on life is important to address some of these difficult questions, and particularly the problem of evil. When atheists and other unbelievers say, well, there can't be a good God because all this evil in the world, and killing the Canaanites and even the slavery issue. How does an eternal perspective help us, if at all?
Well, when Harold Kushner wrote his bestseller on suffering, and he said that why in the world did God not just wipe out Hitler in 1939? Or why did he send an earthquake as soon as the gas chambers started? And he was asking that question. When I was reading that book, I was thinking he was going to turn and say God's just a moral monster. But instead, he turned the other way. And he said, let's not blame God for that. It's totally fine because it's not God's fault. God's too small. He's too aloof, kind of like the Thomas Jeffersonian approach.
Mm-hmm.
But then you take that and you look at these big worldviews all of us talk about. You have pantheism, which is, well, deny the evil and suffering. It doesn't exist, but there is a God. Then you have atheism, which is there is no God, but there is real evil and suffering. But then you have theism, which is, no, there's both. And then you choose. I mean, is evil eventually going to be done away with because there is a God and there is an eternal perspective? If it's just atheism, well, then all evil and suffering just strips away all meaning and purpose in this life. But if there is a God and there's eternal life out there, then any type of evil and suffering can only grow your meaning and purpose as you head towards eternal life.
Yes, absolutely. And it's important to remember, friends, that if Christianity is true, people don't die, they just change location. They go from this life to the next life. And that's really up to God when that happens. It's not under our prerogative. But I think, Cliff, your point about we don't like a judging God is very important to make, because so many people think that somehow judgment is wrong. I'm reminded of Miroslav Volf, who I think was a professor, maybe still is at Yale, and you guys are going to be visiting there shortly.
He comes to our church occasionally. Yeah.
Does he? Oh, okay. Yeah. Anyway, he was saying that prior to his country being overrun by Soviets, he thought there couldn't be a good God because there's too much evil in the world, and we don't buy into this judging God. He said after he saw some of his own countrymen murdered and raped, he said, I can't believe in a God that doesn't judge.
Yes. Well,
because just I saw it with my own eyes, and a loving God is going to judge that.
Mm-hmm.
So
and it's so interesting. I quote his out of Exclusion and Embrace when he does the studies on the Balkans and other areas, saying that if you look even in the Middle East, those countries that generally speaking believe that there is an eternal world, transcendent world out there where there is a God that will judge, they have more peace within those countries as opposed to those that are more nihilistic where there is no eternity and judgment out there. So you have to get retribution in this life. So if your dad killed my dad, then I'm going to kill you, and the cycle just keeps going. So I thought that was interesting that he quoted those historical studies on the culture.
Wow, that is interesting too. It's also it reminds me of the difference between, say, Christianity and Marxism. In Christianity, we believe that the individual is eternal. In Marxism, they believe the state is eternal. And so you can kill the individual here because you need to take care of the state. Of course, we believe that no, the government is temporary. The government's here to serve and secure the rights of people and protect them from evil. But the individual is actually eternal. And so when you get those things reversed, you get people like Mao, or you get people like Stalin who murder their own people because they think the government's eternal rather than the individual. Hey, Cliff, I wanted to ask you this, particularly with regard to what you're seeing on college campuses. What do you think is the greatest misconception that people have about Christianity and the greatest misconception that people have about Jesus? You can both answer that, but let's start with Cliff.
First big misconception is sin. Oh gosh, you Christians, you're all into sin, sin, sin. What a horribly negative approach to life. No, friend, I'm sorry. If your philosophy, if your worldview, if your view of reality does not include a realistic understanding of sin, you are in big, big trouble when it comes to dealing with reality. If I get a headache and it's just a result of a flu or some stress, aspirin will work. But if I have a headache that's as a result of a brain tumor, aspirin is an exercise in futility. So we have to diagnose the problem correctly. And I think that's where Jesus comes in. He diagnosed the problem correctly. He said, for from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, fornication, theft, murder, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, wickedness. All these evil things come over from within, and they defile a person. So I think there's a real reticence in the part of many people to seriously consider sin, because it smacks of being too negative, too critical. And then it obviously also brings in the issue of God and the cross and the need for forgiveness, which is very uncomfortable for a lot of people. So to be able to explain sin, to talk about, is what I'm going to be doing a little bit more at Cornell, is to talk about the Garden of Eden and how Satan basically communicated that God refuses to give you free will, choice, and you also better be discontent. Well, God gives us free will, and the problem is that we get discontent and we want more than what God has given us, we think, and that we think that's where we're going to find satisfaction. And Jesus comes along and says, no, I've come to deal with sin on the cross. You need to repent and trust in me. And then I love the biblical language. Unless you pick up your cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. Yeah, I need to learn to die, not to my worth as a human being, but to die to my sinful nature. And come on, guys, what does sin lead to? It leads to genocide, tyranny. It leads to the breakdown of international relations, the breakdown of society's relations, the breakdown of the family. What is sin? It's lying, cheating. It leads to financial crisis. So the more you think it through, the more you realize how Jesus has analyzed the issue correctly and now has a solution, whereas atheism has no solution to the sin problem. So that's sort of what been thinking about, and I want to go at harder at Cornell next week.
Anything to add to that, Stuart? What do you think the greatest misconception is about Christianity and Jesus?
Still, that it's just one religion of many. And so why are you out here pushing your religion if all religions are the same, or at the very least, a type of self-help crutch? So what's the point of you guys even doing this? This is ridiculous. You're just adding some type of level of conflict, and it's arrogant.
Isn't it amazing? And I love your analogy there, Cliff, about a brain tumor, that we would never go to a doctor who said, well, you just say, hey, how do we cure the brain tumor, doc? And he goes, whatever you want to do is fine. Just smoke cigarettes all day. That'll fix it. Right? You know, I mean, you'd go, I need a new doctor. But when it comes to eternity, we just say, oh yeah, do whatever you want. Everything's fine. I just, it's amazing that we kind of buy into this idea that religion is just a preference, that it doesn't deal with facts about reality, when of course it does. Let me go back to the sin issue for just a minute, because you guys were on a podcast recently, or a YouTube video, and the topic was, why is homosexuality a sin, right? That it always comes up. And why does God care what we do sexually? So why don't you start, Stuart, and then I'll throw that on over to Cliff. Give us a point or two on that issue, homosexuality.
Well, firstly, heterosexual sin is mentioned over 160 times in the Bible. Homosexual sin is only mentioned 3 times. Jesus uses the word porneia, but that's in reference predominantly to a man protecting a woman. And so part of the reason for sexuality and marriage and using it is to be fruitful and multiply. But also, obviously, you're supposed to exercise your sexuality, Jesus is saying, within a family unit, and it's supposed to be lifelong. And a big part of that is the man protecting the woman. And so we get things like the Me Too movement, oddly enough, coming from Christianity, even though certain people groups want to adopt it and weaponize it. But so for me, it's a matter of breaking it down. I think Christians can just look at something like homosexuality just with disgust, and because they view it in a disgustful kind of way, they'll elevate it to the top sin right next to murder. And so we definitely don't want to do that, but we do want to break down, what is the purpose of sex? Why does Jesus talk about something like being fruitful and multiply, especially in an individualistic culture where Time magazine on the front cover not too long ago was just praising singleness. But then if you get married, praising if you don't have any children. And that's largely the atheistic, secularist worldview, is why in the world would you have any type of child if it gets in the way of the ultimate idol for them, which is your own personal happiness?
Cliff, anything to add?
Genesis 2:24, we read, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." There is a very positive statement of the purpose of human sexuality. Now, if life doesn't have a purpose, it doesn't matter what you do with your life. And if there is no God who creates our sexuality for a purpose, it doesn't matter whether you have sex with an animal, with yourself, with a picture, with someone of the same gender. It doesn't matter. It's all relative. But of course, the Bible and Jesus insist, no, there's a purpose to your life and there's a purpose to your sexuality. And it's for one man and one woman to leave mom and dad, to be united to each other, and then within that context, to enjoy the gift of sex as a precious gift from God. Now, all of us, beginning with me, have twisted the gift of sex. I don't care whether it's heterosexual lust, homosexual lust, pornography, promiscuity, we all have sinned. And the amazing message of Jesus Christ is he offers us forgiveness, grace through his death on a cross. The question is, am I going to be willing to face up to my wrongdoing and ask him for forgiveness? Or am I going to blame shift? Am I going to play games? Am I going to continue to rebel against him? That's the basic question I have to answer.
Yeah, it's a very powerful aspect of life, sex, quite obviously. And it would be strange if an infinite God, first of all, wasn't strange to us. But secondly, if an infinite God did not have any sort of boundaries around such a powerful experience that not only binds people together, but also brings forth humanity. It would be strange if there were no boundaries around that. And people, they don't want to have boundaries around it, yet when there are no boundaries around it, all sorts of chaos ensues. And you mentioned earlier, I think it's a very insightful, Cliff, about the fact that when you go to a college campus now, you have to kind of worry about the emotional fragility of the audience. And part of that probably has come from the destruction of the family due to the sexual revolution.
Right. That's exactly right.
The number one fear that kids have between the ages of 5 and 17 is that their parents will get a divorce.
Wow. Yeah.
And it scars the children, and then they become emotionally fragile. They don't have that security at home. And so when they go out into the world, the folks who are administrators at many of these colleges think they have to coddle these kids because they have no emotional depth. They have no security about them. It's really tragic.
Well put, brother.
And the marriages that stay together in our town, all of them have just become platonic, and all of them is just the spouse putting up with the other spouse, or
really
open marriages. Polyamory is gigantic right now in our county.
In Connecticut?
Oh yeah, I was at a Christmas party with about 500 other young families who are moving to our town, and I was in line for some hors d'oeuvres, and some people started touching each other like really like kind of just like a little extra on the shoulder and the back, and I thought, well, these people don't know each other. What's going on here? Turns out it was one big orgy. 500 basically brand new folks to our county, actually just our town. And I'm standing there and my friend gets asked, hey, we wish we met you before your husband did. And you want to come to this party. So I don't know how many people within, but it was a very large group within that 500. And it's become totally socially acceptable. Its marriage is boring now. This will help our marriage. And it'll draw other people, and we'll have deeper relationships. And sadly, I know another person who I was buddies with in seminary who was part of a big, very conservative church. I won't say where it is, but she had a very big leadership role in a church, and she got caught up in a polyamorous relationship not too long ago, and it was just added, and fuel was thrown on that fire, and other people in leadership said, hey, let's be repentant. But more and more of them were not repentant, and they were leaders in the church saying, no, we don't need to be repentant. This is socially acceptable. So,
socially acceptable. Well, anything could be socially acceptable.
Right.
Of course.
We don't talk to God about it. Exactly.
Yeah. If we're making the rules, we can do whatever we want, of course. Wow, that's really shocking. I didn't know it had gone that far. That people are like acting like they're in high school or something and think they can hook up with anybody.
Mhm.
That's kind of shocking, but I don't doubt it. Why are none of us listening or watching to this doubting this? This is what's going on, and they're exploding their relationships. It's not gonna end well.
Nope.
Tragically.
Mhm.
Let me ask you one other thing, Cliff, about something you were talking about when you were on a podcast with George Janko. George Janko, a Christian podcaster. He had a bunch of Christian leaders on. You guys were on. I think Ruslan was on, and George was on. A couple others I didn't recognize. But you got talking about the essentials of Christianity, and you started talking about why Jesus plus anything is a problem. Can you unpack that for our audience?
Main point of the book of Galatians is it's not Jesus plus circumcision that is the way to heaven. Paul is arguing, no, it's Jesus alone. And if you Judaizers want to try and add circumcision to the salvation equation, you're off base. That's wrong. That is totally wrong. In Colossians, you've got it's not Jesus plus angels or Jesus plus a type of spiritual experience that only the elite have, where you find fulfillment and satisfaction. No, it's Jesus alone. So throughout the New Testament, the exclusivity of Christ is taught. It's very, very clear. And what I find so frustrating among so many people that I talk with is so many people say, Cliff, that's very narrow minded. And if you were truly open minded, you would realize that all paths lead to heaven. Let's be real honest. And this was a point that Logan Paul kept on coming back at me and not liking what he heard. If I believe that all religions lead to God, that is obviously a truth claim. I am contradicting over 50% of the people on the planet who are either Muslim, Christian, or Jew who think that no, not all paths lead to heaven. If I say that half the religions lead to heaven, that is also a truth claim. I'm saying half the religions are right, half the religions are wrong. And if I say Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me, that also is a truth claim that Christ is making. So let's be real honest. We all are making truth claims. The question is, what is the option that the evidence supports as being reliable, as being accurate? And when you read the Gospels, when you read about the life, teachings, death, and resurrection of Jesus, the overwhelming evidence is Jesus Christ is reliable.
Yes, and so many people want to add to that, particularly cults. They always want to add something to Jesus to make it look. If you got to do something other than Jesus, why do we need Jesus at all? Right? I mean, Paul says in Galatians, if righteousness can be achieved by adherence to the law, then Christ died in vain.
Yep.
And so many of us want to add something to Jesus, and the message of Jesus is no. He is enough. We're not enough.
Correct.
He is enough. And so I think that's a big misconception people have about Christianity. Christianity's, some method to get people to behave better. I mean, it happened. That's the result of Christianity, but it's not. It's not the cause.
Right.
Right. It's not the focus of Christianity is Jesus. We put our trust in him. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Cliff and Stuart go to a lot of colleges. And I want you guys, if you're anywhere near them, to go support them and see them. They've got several in the Northeast coming up. Before I get to their calendar, let me mention that tomorrow night, if you're listening to this on Tuesday, tomorrow night we're going to be at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. That is the 19th. Let me make sure that date is correct. The 19th of March, that's correct. And the following week, we will be at Mississippi State. That is the 27th of March. So check our calendar for that. But Cliff and Stuart, where are you guys going to be and how can people see you?
March 20th and 21st, we're going to be at Cornell University beginning at noon in front of the bookstore. March 27 and 28, we'll be at Columbia University in New York City, hopefully on the sundial beginning at noon. Friday, April 4th, we'll be at Harvard University at noon. I'm not sure where they're going to have us. April 7 and 8, we're going to be at Clemson University in South Carolina, beginning at noon once again. We always begin at noon and go till 3, 4, or 5 o'clock.
Okay.
And then April 14th, we're going to be at Yale University in New Haven, and April 15th at University of Connecticut in Storrs, Connecticut. And then Thursday, April 24th, and Friday, April 25th at UMass Amherst. And then we will be at Princeton University in New Jersey on Thursday, May 1, and Friday, May 2.
And you expect to come through this alive?
We love it, brother. It's a real privilege.
Where do people go to learn more about the schedule and about your videos? Where do they go?
Mainly our Instagram account, which is just Stuart, STUART _Knechtle, KNECHTLE. We'll predominantly put it up there.
We'll put it in the show notes. Okay, and the calendar's up there too?
Yeah, we're putting it up there, yeah.
Okay, now you're both pastors, so you're preaching every week, at least one of you are. Where's the church, and how can they view this online, or one of your services? Tell people about that.
It's Grace Community Church. We meet at New Canaan High School, 11 Farm Road in New Canaan, Connecticut, right off the Merritt Parkway, 9:30 every Sunday morning. And we do live stream it, don't we? I better have Stuart answer those questions. I can barely turn on my computer.
It's just YouTube and Facebook Live, Grace Community Church, New Canaan, Connecticut, 9:30 a.m. service.
All right, folks. So if you're anywhere in the Northeast, you can obviously attend the church. And notice most of those colleges, with the exception of Clemson, are up in the Northeast. So they're out there in the Lion's Den on the college campus interacting with folks. Start with a 4 or 5 minute little talk, and then it's all Q&A. And we hope to bring one of these live. We're going to check into see if we can do that, live stream one of these events so you can see them, and maybe even you can get a question in on the chat. We'll see about doing that, because Cliff and Stuart are doing great work on the college campus and also in church. So, gents, it's always great to have you on, and thanks for your insights, and thanks for your courage going to the college campus.
Thank you, Frank, for your courage, and for the ministry you're fulfilling upon God's call on your life, brother. You're an example to us.
That's for sure.
As you are to me. So I'm really encouraged what you're doing, and we're going to try and support it as much as we can. So check them out, ladies and gentlemen. Cliff and Stuart Knechtle. We'll put all of the connections, all of the links in the show notes. And you can follow them and support what they do. They're on the front lines. We need more people doing this. And they're out there. So also pray for them, if you will, because it can be difficult to be in an open air situation, particularly on a leftist college campus where a lot of the administration and many of the students are not very enthused about them being there. So, all right, folks, thanks so much. And Lord willing, we will see you here next week on the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. God bless.
If you're looking for solid answers to life's biggest questions, don't miss the latest episode of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, iHeart, OnePlace, and Podchaser. Tune in, discover the truth, and share it with someone who needs it. Let's keep spreading the truth together.